And this morning we are covering a hearing with Janet Napolitano, the Homeland Security Secretary, testifying on immigration and border security issues. This after the U.S. reported yesterday a record number of people in fiscal year 2011 deported from the U.S., some 400,000 individuals.
This amendment is about white squirrel sanctuaries, museums, roadside landscaping, Lincoln Highway, roadside museum, antique bike collections, my favorite, National Corvette Museum, Simulator Theater. I'm going to try to go to that one since my first purchase as a young naval officer was a wonderful Corvette that I remember with great affection. So I'd like to go back into their Simulator Theater. And then, of course, wildlife echo passages, and we got some great pictures here of some of the things. I think the squirrel sanctuary is good, but one of my favorites is of course, is the roadside museum featuring a giant coffee pot. Now, I am a coffee drinker, and so I think a coffee pot is pretty nice. And, you know, we've got, what else we got here? We got some fun stuff, really. 60 antique bikes for a bicycle museum. They paid $440,000 for that, for 60 antique bikes for a bicycle museum. Now, again, I think bicycle museums are really nice. But, you know, it's also a fact that more people travel over deficient bridges every day. That's 210 million people than go to McDonald's. So we have these projects here, and obviously, full disclosure, we picked some of the more interesting and exciting ones to get our colleagues' attention. But the fact is that we have deficient bridges. We have highways that need repair. And so what I'm trying to say here is let the states decide their priorities. Do not force the states to set aside 10% of their funding for these so-called transportation enhancement activities. If they want to have enhancement activities, and we do, I'm so pleased driving through Phoenix and Tucson to see the bougainvillea and the cactus and the other things that have been built there and put in, which have been very helpful. But those decisions on those state highways were made by the state of Arizona and the cities and the counties. Instead, we have forced every state in America to use 10% of their taxpayers' dollars, which are in the form of gasoline taxes, which were originally put in to build the national highway system in America under the Eisenhower administration, that they pay. They pay. And so at the same time, we have a situation such as the deputy director in southern Nevada of the Nevada Department of Transportation. He was quoted as saying, quote, "It's really getting out of hand to where these pots of money have those constraints associated with them, and you can't spend money where you want to." That's what this is all about. This is a fundamental philosophical difference that we have about where taxpayers' dollars should go and who decides. That's what this amendment is about. I want the mayor of Phoenix to decide where the money goes. I want the Department of Transportation in Arizona to decide where the money is best spent. And so we shouldn't be forcing people to spend money on things that are not necessary anymore. I think a squirrel what is it back? I think that the white squirrel sanctuary is probably an important thing, and squirrel lovers all over America are overjoyed. But who loves this boulder? Really? $498,750 to beautify an interchange with decorative rocks? Well, and it's not as if this money is spent in a vacuum. It really is that we have to set priorities, and I'd like for the states to set those priorities rather than it be mandated by some provision enacted here in the United States Senate, which really does not have a good handle on what those states' priorities are. I note the presence of the senator from Washington who would like to use a few minutes in opposition to the amendment, and I look forward to hearing her eloquent opposition. Maybe she'll change my mind. I yield to the senator from Washington.
Madam President.
Senator from Washington.
Madam President, I would very much like to thank the senator for yielding me some time, and we'll just take a couple minutes in rising to speak in opposition to the McCain Amendment number 739. Now, I believe the intent of my colleague is to prohibit the use of funds that communities across the nation use for streetscaping and bike and pedestrian paths and transportation improvements that help separate motor vehicles from local wildlife. I believe communities should determine that for themselves, as they have done for decades, how to use those funds and that the proper place for updating these laws would be in the reauthorization process. So I oppose the amendment on those grounds alone. However, the amendment goes much further than that. It actually prohibits the use of funds in the entire Division C, that is the Transportation and Housing and Urban Development Appropriations Act, for any landscaping or historic preservation. So this impacts not just the Department of Transportation, but also HUD. In particular, it would prohibit cities and towns from using their CDBG dollars for eligible activities like historic preservation or basic landscaping or streetscaping activities. It actually prohibits the use of funds for the rehabilitation or operation of historic transportation buildings, structures, and facilities. Madam President, that would cripple Amtrak. There are over 126 stations that Amtrak services in 41 states that are on a national register of historic places. Under this amendment, Amtrak would not be able to operate or rehabilitate any of them. Amtrak could not make any improvements to stations to comply with access requirements for persons with disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and Amtrak could not even operate in Union Station. The amendment would also prohibit the structural preservation or rehabilitation of historic bridges, such as the Brooklyn Bridge or other covered bridges in the Northeast. So, Madam President, this amendment goes too far, and it is not appropriate for the Transportation and Housing Appropriations Bill that we are currently considering. So I urge my colleagues to oppose the McCain Amendment. And again, I thank my colleague for yielding me time.
Madam President,
Senator from Arizona.
I believe I heard the senator from Washington say it would prohibit activities by Amtrak. I know of nothing in this page-and-a-quarter amendment that would in any way affect Amtrak or the Brooklyn Bridge. In fact, I would like for the money to be used to repair bridges, because there are so many thousands of bridges in the country. There's 146,633 deficient bridges in this country. I would hope that the senator from Washington would agree with me that this money, the deficient bridges are a threat and a danger. I believe it was the state of Washington where one collapsed, as I recall. So, you know, you can distort this amendment if you want to. You can say that it would be the end of Western civilization as we know it. You can say that this will cause irreparable harm and damage? It doesn't, my friends. It doesn't. It just says none of the amounts would be for scenic or historic highway programs, including tourist and welcome centers. And we're not prohibiting these things being built. The states want to build them, counties want to build them, cities want to build them. Let them do it. Let them do it. But right now, we're mandating that 10% of the money that they get go to certain purposes, which results in this outcome. So I say with respect to my colleagues that are opposing this amendment, if you'd like to amend the amendment so that it doesn't have the draconian effects that are predicted here, I'd be more than happy to amend the amendment to make sure that doesn't happen. What I'm trying to say here, and what this amendment clearly says in its 10 lines and on the front and 4 lines on the back, that we just think that these things are unnecessary in light of the fact that we have so much infrastructure in need of repair. So, again, I had no contemplation that civilization would be affected so terribly by such an amendment, which would try to give the Director of Transportation in Southern Nevada be able to say, quote, it's really getting out of hand to where these pots of money have these constraints associated with them, and you can't spend money where you want to. That's what this amendment is all about, my friends. I've been engaged in many debates on the floor of the Senate on various amendments, but to construe this very short amendment as somehow inhibiting or harmful to the work that needs to be done is obviously, in my view, fairly transparent and certainly not applicable to this amendment. So how much time do I have remaining?
3 minutes, 23 seconds.
How long?
3 minutes, 23 seconds.
Senator Inhofe would like to use that time. I would be
Let me
happy
ask
to yield.
parliamentary inquiry here. It's my understanding that the last 10 minutes would be equally divided, but that perhaps the senator from Arizona has already used maybe 2 of those minutes. Is that correct? I just want to be recognized for, say, 6 minutes. Is that all right? In opposition.
Is this in addition to your existing 3 minutes?
Say it again.
You have, in addition to your 5 minutes that were allocated?
So I do have.
A total of 11 minutes of debate.
I don't know. Well, it doesn't. Let me just clarify this. It doesn't make a difference to the senator from Arizona or to me how much time I have. I need to have about 5 minutes to clarify a couple of things.
Objection?
Madam President, I'm happy to yield my 5 minutes to Senator Inhofe at the appropriate point.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Well, I think the appropriate time is here. Yeah.
Senator from Oklahoma.
All right. Thank you very much. First of all, I disagree with the senator from Washington for a different reason than the senator from Arizona disagrees with her. He says she says it doesn't go far enough. I think his amendment goes too far. Not just not far enough, but too far. And I think it's very important that people understand. And let me talk to the conservatives. Let me talk to the Republicans. Because this thing is certainly misunderstood. It wasn't drafted the way to carry out the intent of the senator from Arizona, I'm quite sure. This amendment doesn't eliminate the mandate that states have to spend 10% of their Surface Transportation Program funds on transportation enhancements. Now, for clarification purposes, the 10% really is not representing it properly. It really should be 2%. It's 2% of the state's total highway program. That happens to equal 10% of the Surface Transportation Program. But let's go ahead and use the 10%. There are currently 11, written into the law, 11 eligible transportation enhancement activities. These 11, there's not room here to put them all up, but sit that chart up. What the senator from Arizona is saying is you still have to spend the 10% of the money, of your surface transportation money, on transportation enhancements. But he's saying the states have to use it on his transportation enhancements. Those are the bike and pedestrian facilities, the bike and pedestrian safety, rails to trails. That's another bike. You know, the bikers are going to be very happy with this. They're the only ones coming out ahead should this thing be passed. And then environmental mitigation. Now, environmental mitigation in our law is restricted specifically to wildlife bridges and tunnels and to certain stormwater runoff enhancements. Now, stormwater runoff is taken care of anyway. These are the enhancements. So those are the what we're saying is, or what this amendment is saying, that that we're going to have to spend this 10% on bicycles and on various types of wildlife bridges and tunnels so that the turtles can get under the highways, not get run over. It'll be, and that is not what I know that the senator from Arizona wants. In other words, we are taking the flexibility away from the cities, away from the states, and saying to them, you've got to spend your 10%, and you've got to spend it on these 4 things. Now, I just would suggest to you that in my state of Oklahoma, this is not the 4 things that we would want to spend it on. So I just, you know, I come down here all the time, and this mentality that we have in Washington, no idea is a good idea unless it comes from Washington. Well, in my state of Oklahoma, we have a great highway program. I want them to have the latitude to decide what is really best. Now, as the chairman of the Environment Public Works Committee, Senator Boxer, she and I have disagreed on environmental issues tooth and nail. We fought with each other more than any 2 people on the floor of the Senate. And she knows that I've done everything within my power to do away with all transportation enhancement requirements. I've done this. But if this amendment had eliminated the mandate that states spend 10% of their surface transportation programs funds on all transportation enhancement, I philosophically would have supported it. If the McCain Amendment had said that we want to do away with all transportation enhancement, I would have philosophically supported it. The problem with that is we would not be able to get a highway bill done. And, you know, I often say that I have been actually ranked as the most conservative member of the United States Senate for more probably than anyone else. But I've also said I'm a big spender in 2 areas. Number 1 is national defense. Number 2 is infrastructure. That's what I think we're supposed to be doing here, roads and bridges. Now, I'm sure my colleagues will recall that during the debate on the extension of the highway bill last month, Senators Boxer, Coburn, Reed, and I worked out an agreement that reforms the transportation enhancement program, which would be included in the next highway bill that the EPW committee will be marking up next month. And I hope we are marking this up next month. These reforms would allow the states to make a determination as to how they want to spend their funds. Now, if you go back to this 10%, this would increase, the idea behind this, it would increase what we are able to do and let the states make the discretion so they could totally eliminate all enhancements. The states can do that. But they also would be allowed to use the 10% of the surface transportation funds on the various programs that are out there having to do with endangered species and the burying beetle and all that. That's where the problems really are. So I don't think that we should mistakenly vote for the McCain Amendment and say to the people of this country that you've got to spend 10% of your surface transportation funds on these 4 things. And again, the bikers would love it, bike trails and all that, but I don't believe that is what we should be doing here. And I'll retain the balance of my time.
Senator's time has expired. Senator from Arizona has 2 minutes, 55 seconds.
Well, I see my colleague from Texas on the floor. Did she have? Madam President, again, you know, the question is what do we do with the money? And obviously, when taxpayers are told that with 146,633 deficient bridges in this country, that we don't need to be spending them on the examples that I have provided. I hope that it is well understood that it's time if those projects are felt needed by the states and the county and the elected officials in the states, then they should be able to go ahead with them. But if they don't choose to, they should also have the right not to. It's time some of this kind of stuff stopped. I hope that people will vote my colleagues will vote in favor of the amendment. And, Madam President, I yield the balance of my time.
I'd ask the chair how much time I have remaining.
No time is remaining.
I asked me next because I have 30 seconds remaining. Is that okay?
Without objection.
All right. I only want to say I agree with everything that the senator from Arizona is saying in terms of bridges. I have fought for the bridges and the highways. I've tried my best to get rid of all the enhancements, all of them. But to have an amendment that says to my state of Oklahoma, you've still got to spend 10% of your surface transportation funds, but you got to spend it on bike trails and turtle bridges, I think it's wrong. So with that, I will.
Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, which the clerk will report.
Nominations: Mark Raymond Hornak of Pennsylvania to be United States District Judge, Robert David Mariana of Pennsylvania to be United States District Judge, Robert N. Scola, Jr. of Florida to be United States District Judge.
Under the previous order, there will be 10 minutes of debate equally divided in the usual form. Under the previous order, who yields time?
Madam President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Madam President, I rise to speak about both nominees. I'll start with Bob Mariani, and I refer to him that way because I've known him a long time, but full name obviously is Robert David Mariani. Bob Mariani is someone that I know to be a person of not just high intellect and ability, but also someone of great integrity. He was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, with the same city I was born in, and I still live there, and so does he. He received his law degree cum laude in 1976 from the Syracuse University School of Law. Also received his college education cum laude from Villanova University, graduating within the top 10% of his class, and he was ranked second within his major field of study as an undergraduate. Bob Mariani is a well-respected lawyer and advocate in northeastern Pennsylvania. He's received the highest rating, well qualified, from the American Bar Association. He spent 34 years as a civil litigator in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where he specializes in labor and employment law. Since 2001, he's been the sole shareholder in the law firm that bears his name. He was also the sole proprietor of a similar law office that bears his name from 1993 to the year 2001. Partner as well in an earlier iteration of that law firm, Mariani and Greco, from 1979 to 1993. He has taught labor law at Penn State University. He's been an instructor at Penn State's Union Leadership Academy program, where he taught law, labor law and collective bargaining. A whole series of commendations and awards that I won't list for purposes of the time we have today. But probably the most important thing I could say about Bob, and I know I may be a little biased because I know him and I have great respect for him, but this is a person who will apply the law. This is a person who understands that when someone comes before him, they should be accorded basic fairness, no matter who they are, no matter what point of view, no matter where they come from. And I know that integrity and commitment to the public service, not just of the law, but the public service that a judge can provide, that those values will guide Bob Mariani as a judge. And I'm very happy that we'll be voting on his nomination. Also today, Mark Raymond Hornak. I know Mark from not as long as I've known Bob Mariani, but more than 15 years now. Mark is a native of Homestead, Pennsylvania, southwestern Pennsylvania, and just by way of a quick summary of his educational background, he got his law degree summa cum laude, meaning the highest honors in 1981 from the University of Pittsburgh Law School, graduating second in his class. He was editor-in-chief of the University of Pittsburgh Law Review. He got his college degree from the University of Pittsburgh as well, and was a Dean's List student and a member of the Honor Society there. His career has been varied and significant as a lawyer and advocate. Partner in the law firm of Buchanan, Ingersoll & Rooney since 1982. He has specialized in civil litigation, labor and employment law, media defense, and governmental representation, and is a member of the firm's executive committee. He's the solicitor of the Sports and Exhibition Authority of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, and also has been very active in his community in Pittsburgh. He also represents national television, radio, and publishing clients in media litigation, including defamation, First Amendment, and access issues in transaction matters. Prior to coming to the Buchanan, Ingersoll & Rooney firm, Mark served as law clerk to the Honorable James M. Sprouse of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. Mark as well, has a long list of honors and achievements that I won't list today. But again, someone who has great integrity and ability, but also someone who understands that serving on the bench on a federal district court, whether it's in Bob Mariani's case, the Middle District, and in Mark Hornak's case, the Western District of Pennsylvania, service of that kind is public service. And with that comes the responsibilities and obligations of being a public servant. Both of these candidates understand that, both Bob Mariani and Mark Hornak, and I'm so honored to be able to speak today regarding their nominations. And I would urge a yes vote on both nominations. I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Florida.
Mr. President, we have a judge that will be in front of the Senate, and it's my understanding it's been worked out. It's going to be by voice vote. And I just want to thank the leadership of the appropriate committee, the Judiciary Committee, for handling this with dispatch. In a big growth state like Florida, where there is such a caseload in the federal judiciary, when we have a vacancy, it needs to be attended to right away. Fortunately, the two senators from Florida try to take the politics out of the selection of judges by letting that interviewing process, the selection, be done by a panel of prominent citizens called a Judicial Nominating Commission, and they recommend at least 3 to the 2 senators. The senators then interview them and let the White House know, and the White House has agreed, much to the credit of this White House, that they will select from among those that we submit. And those that we submit are the ones that came out of the Judicial Nominating Commission. And thus, with the selection of Judge Robert Scola, who we will confirm today, who was nominated in May of this year. He received his bachelor's from Brown, went to Boston College for law school, and he was graduating cum laude, spent 6 years working as a prosecutor in the Miami-Dade County State Attorney's Office. He then practiced law as a criminal defense attorney representing individuals and corporations in both state and federal courts. He was then appointed back in '95 by the governor to the 11th Judicial Circuit Court bench, where he has sat as a state court judge all the way up until today. He received his well-qualified rating from the American Bar, and certainly Senator Rubio and I have told the White House when we submitted the names from the Judicial Nominating Commission that we certainly agreed with all of these nominees. And so with this strong tradition of bipartisan support for our judicial nominees, I bring to the Senate's attention for confirmation Judge Robert Scola.
Mr. President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Mr. President, I just rise for literally 30 seconds. What I failed to do when I was talking about both nominees was to thank Senator Toomey, my colleague from Pennsylvania. We worked together on both of these nominees with a process to arrive at a consensus position. So I'm grateful for Senator Toomey's help on this and grateful for the work of his staff as well. And I would yield the floor.
Under the previous order, the Hornak and Scola nominations are confirmed, and the question occurs on the Mariani nomination.
Mr. President,
Senator from Pennsylvania.
I would ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there sufficient second? What can I? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons, Mr. Corker, Mr. Cornyn, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Dement, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Kerry, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor.
No. Okay.
Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb.
Can you put reluctantly?
Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden. Senators voting in the affirmative: Begich, Boxer, Brown of Ohio, Collins, Crapo, Durbin, Franken, Isaacson, Mikulski, Nelson of Florida, Pryor, and Tester. Senator Inhofe voted in the negative. Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Rubio, aye. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johans, aye. Mr. Paul. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Lugar, aye. Mr. Merkley. Mr. Merkley, aye. Mrs. Hagan. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Brown. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Vitter, aye. Mr. Moran.
Aye.
Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Coons. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Leahy, aye. Mr. Dement. Mr. Dement, no. Mrs. Hutchison, no. Mr. Nelson. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. Mr. McCain. Mr. McCain, aye. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Coburn, no. Ms. Cantwell, aye. Mr. Corker. Mr. Corker, aye. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Sanders, aye. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray, aye. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Inouye, aye. Mr. Cochran. Mr. Cochran, aye. Mr. Kyle. Mr. Kyle, aye. Mr. Vitter, no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, no. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, aye. Ms. Ayotte. Ms. Ayotte, aye. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Menendez, aye. Mr. Kirk. Mr. Kirk, aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mr. Manchin. Mr. Manchin, aye. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Conrad, aye. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, aye. Mr. Alexander. Mr. Alexander, aye. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hatch, aye. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coates, aye. Ms. Snow. Ms. Snow, aye. Mr. Shelby. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi, aye. Mr. Carey. Mr. Carey, aye. Mr. Heller. Mr. Heller, aye. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Chambliss, aye. Mr. Hoeven. Mr. Hoeven, aye. Mr. Graham. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Enzi, no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, no. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Risch. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Bingaman, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts. No. Mr. Akaka. Mr. Akaka. Aye. Mr. Burr. No. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Ms. Landrieu. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Mr. Webb. Mr. Webb, aye. Mr. Portman. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lieberman, aye. Mr. Harkin. Mr. Harkin, aye. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Blunt, no. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Udall. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Carper. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mr. Levin. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mrs. McCaskill. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Casey. Mr. Casey, aye. Whitehouse. Mr. Whitehouse, aye.
Are there any senators who wish to vote or to change his or her vote? Are there any senators who haven't voted who wish to vote? So I can go right away, too. All right. The vote is 82 aye, 17 nay, and the nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motions to reconsider are considered made and laid upon the table, the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate will resume legislative session. Under the previous order, there will be 2 minutes of debate, equally divided between the Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, and the Senator from California, Mrs. Boxer, or their designees. Order, because we have 2 minutes from Senator McCain and 2 minutes from Senator, 1 minute each from Senator McCain and from Senator Boxer or their designees. So please, order. The Senator from California, and I would ask order.
Mr. President, could we have order?
Yes. I would ask order. Thank you.
Colleagues, the reason I ask for order is because this amendment affects each and every one of you and your constituents. The McCain amendment says to the states that they can't use a certain section of the transportation bill for several things, including scenic or historic highway programs, including tourist centers, landscaping or scenic beautification, historic preservation, and it goes on. The point I want to make is this amendment is opposed by the National Association of Counties, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, the National League of Cities, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the U.S. Travel Association. That is a nonpartisan list. And let me tell you why. The way this amendment is drafted, historic bridges could never even be repaired. The Brooklyn Bridge or other historic bridges could not be repaired. And we could not control erosion. We would have major problems. I would move to table the McCain amendment. I'm sorry. I would move to table the
That motion is not in order while time remains.
All right.
The Senator from Arizona has 1 minute.
I've made the argument that these projects are unnecessary. We have tens of thousands of bridges that are deficient. We need to spend the money where it should be, and I hope that my colleagues will understand that these things might have been appropriate some time ago, but in this day and age, with our crumbling infrastructure, we need to put the money in the right place. With that, I yield the balance of my time.
Move to table the McCain amendment number 739, and I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There is. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus. Mr. Bekich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown in Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mikulski. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Well, Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Motion table.
Motion table.
Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johanns, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Kerry, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Andrew. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson, Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. No,